Do you want to dap into the wonderful world of sim racing? Well, this is the video for you. This is going to be an updated 2023 guide for anybody that wants to get into sim racing but doesn't know where to start. So sim racing is a very fun hobby to do, but it can also be really expensive. When you start off sim racing, I really want you to think about the budget that you have, and with that budget you should be able to kind of lay out a roadmap of how much you want to spend and how far you want to get into this passion and this hobby of sim racing. As for me, I have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on my sim racing gear, but to be quite honest, I wouldn't take it back, as this has been one of the best investments that I've made recently, and I also feel like it's going to be the same for you guys. If you have been having an itch to try the sim racing world, this is going to be the perfect guide for you. Now, if you want to skip through some of the chapters, I have labeled it down below. If you guys are interested in a specific segment, you can look at it down below and click the timestamps. Now, the next thing you want to look into after the budget is what platform do you exactly want to sim race on. Luckily, there are a few platforms that you can select from, the first one being a PC, 2 is a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5, and the third one would either be an Xbox One or Xbox Series X. As for me, I primarily use PlayStation and PC, so I had to look for gear that was compatible with both equipment, and with that I had to select the FANATEC, as that works both with the PlayStation and the PC. Now, when selecting the platform, that is going to go hand in hand with which games you want to play. On PC, you have games such as iRacing, Assetto Corsa Competizione, Assetto Corsa, F1, as well as other games. Now, with PlayStation, you have the big guys like Gran Turismo. You also have ACC and the original Assetto Corsa on PlayStation as well. But since I mainly play Gran Turismo and iRacing, that is the reason why I had to select an equipment that worked with both the PC and the PlayStation. Now, with Xbox, the new Forza Motorsport is coming out here later on this year, so maybe you're interested in that and you want to get the Xbox only. Well, you have to make sure that the parts that you get for your sim rig is compatible with that Xbox, and majority of the stuff that is compatible with the Xbox, typically it would be compatible with the PC, so you could kind of Frankenstein your equipment to be compatible with not only one but 2 different platforms. So you should definitely think about that if you ever plan on upgrading to a PC, that sometimes the equipment can work for both the PC and as well as the console. When it comes to budget as well, if you want to build yourself a nice decent PC, you can spend upwards to about $800+ for the PC, but that's why a lot of people venture out to the consoles, just because you're able to save so much more money and you only have to pay about anywhere between $400 to $600 to get a console. Now, the next thing you want to think about other than the console is whether you want to race using a controller or a wheel. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, why would I want to race with a controller? And that is a great question. There are actually really competitive drivers out in the wild that use controller and are really quick. Actually, we have a Gran Turismo World Tour driver that has actually won, and he uses majority of the time controllers. So don't be afraid to only use a controller, to just kind of dip your toes into the world of sim racing and see if it's something that you want to invest more time and more money into. Now, let's say you have done your research, you played enough racing games, and you're ready to jump into the wheel. Well, this is where you're gonna have to do a lot of research to see which one you are going to be compatible with and which one you're just gonna fit your racing needs. So if you have decided to take the next step and you want to actually get into wheel, the very first thing you're going to look at is the wheelbase. Now, there are 2 different types of wheels that you can get. There are belt driven wheels as well as direct drive wheels. Now, there have been a lot of companies that have made budget friendly direct drive wheels, so it has been a lot more affordable to get a direct drive wheel compared to back then, where direct drive wheels used to be upwards to above $1,000 or more. Now, the difference between belt and direct drive is the belt wheelbase is an actual belt that moves left and right with the positioning of the steering wheel. As far as a direct drive wheel, that is an actual motor that is connected to your wheels, so you will get a lot more precise movements in the wheel, as well as a rougher force feedback, so that you can easily feel everything on the road. Now, once you decided whether you want to go belt or direct drive, you have to see which wheelbase works with your platform. Again, this goes back to seeing if you have either an Xbox, a PlayStation, or a PC, and to see which wheelbase will be compatible with the console or the computer that you are using. Another thing that you have to also think about is how much you want to spend on it. How long are you going to be actually doing this hobby? If you feel like you're only going to be doing this hobby for a short amount of time or just every once in a while, you just want a steering wheel that's budget friendly, you can definitely get something that's like a Logitech G29, or even some Thrustmasters are fairly good in price. Just remember that if you do want to ever upgrade, you can always upgrade, especially with the FANATEC. FANATEC. If you guys ever go with FANATEC, it's probably the most modular piece of equipment that you can purchase, and it's pretty affordable nowadays, as you can get a steering wheel, a wheelbase, and pedals around the budget of about $600 to $1,000. Now with the wheelbase direct drive wheel, it is not all made the same. There are certain direct drive wheelbases that are a lot more powerful in torque, and it is measured in Newton meters, so you can kind of see which one works for you. I've seen some that go for 5 Newton meters, some that go for 8, 15, 20, all the way up to about 30 Newton meters. So depending on how much force feedback you need in the wheel, that is one thing to really look into, as if you want to get the most feel in the wheel, you want to get something that has a lot of Newton meters. But I do want to let you know, the higher the Newton meters, the more you're going to be paying for it. As for me, I'm using the FANATEC direct drive wheel, the one that came with the Gran Turismo game, and I used the boost pack of 8 Newton meters, and I think it's enough for me. But you can definitely get something that has a lot more if you want to get more feeling in the steering wheel. But for me, like I said, with 8 Newton meters, I feel like this is a good sweet spot for the price, and I'm completely happy with it. So in addition of selecting the wheelbase, you are also going to be looking at the main star of the show, which is going to be your wheel. Sometimes the wheelbases are locked in with certain wheels, such as the Thrustmasters, the Logitech, stuff like that, the ones that are more on a budget side. But if you do fan out to a more expensive wheelbase, those are going to be modular. So with that being said, you could be a little bit more picky on what type of wheel you're going to be using on your sim rig. Now when selecting a wheel, if you are on a budget, I highly recommend on what type of racing you're going to be doing. If majority of the time you're going to be racing around road circuits, I highly recommend getting a wheel that's going to be in the Formula 1 looking family, or even looking at the GT wheels. If you're doing mainly ovals like NASCAR, ARCA series, or even dirt circuits, I highly recommend getting a large circular wheel. Sometimes you can get the best of both worlds, and you can find one that is a circular wheel but still is small enough to be good for the road circuits. But this is one factor that you should definitely think about when you guys are selecting a wheel. Now of course, if you have more of a budget, then you can get one for each. You can have a road circuit wheel as well as an oval wheel, but that depends on your budget and how much you're willing to spend on the wheel. Now the last thing you want to think about when selecting a wheel is how many buttons you want to have on the wheel. Sometimes you can go a little bit overboard and get one that has about 20 to 30 buttons, but sometimes you get a simple one that has just the main functions that you need in order to navigate around the menus, as well as programming those buttons to do certain features when you are racing. So now that you have selected your wheelbase, the next thing you're going to look into is pedals. Now pedals, in my opinion, are the most important thing that you need to look into if you want to be competitive on sim racing, as the brake and the throttle are what navigates the car through the corners, and that is mainly where you make up either majority of your time or you lose majority of your time. Now depending on how far you want to get into the hobby, there are different types of pedals that you can get. You can either get one that is a potentiometer, one that is a load cell pedal, or you can get a high-end hydraulic damper load cell pedal. Now I'm going to explain to you what each of them are and what I recommend if you guys are just starting into sim racing. So the potentiometer pedals are ones that are used in budget sim racing builds and pedals. With this, you basically have a circular device that measures the travel distance from the pedal from the starting position to the ending position, and that is basically how it measures your braking when you are going into the corners. The reason why this is so important is because with braking, that is going to be the bread and butter of where you're going to be making majority of your time, next to the throttle coming in second. Now there are fast people that use potentiometer pedals, even though they are budget friendly, but depending on what you want to feel out of the pedals, these are going to be the least realistic compared to a road car or a racing car. Now with the potentiometer pedals, these are not the worst. Even though they are the most budget friendly, you can still be very competitive with these, as I have seen a lot of drivers that are very competitive with the potentiometer pedals. But again, the only thing that you're going to be lacking on this is going to be the sensation of having really hard braking. All right, so the next two that we have after the potentiometer are the load cell pedals and the high-end hydraulic damper pedals. Now with the load cell pedals, this is a little bit different than the potentiometer, as the load cell pedals are basically measured by direct force applied to the pedals, and it turns into an electrical signal that is picked up from the game. Now with this, it allows the load cell pedals to give you more of a realistic feeling and that resistance that you would get if you were to drive a road car or a racing car. Now I highly recommend load cell pedals if if you're doing high level sim racing. The reason why is because with the brake pedals, you are able to be more precise with your braking, and you're easily able to manipulate the brake pedal to how much force you want into it. And not only that, it feels really good compared to the potentiometer. Now, if you guys want to go a step further, you can get the high-end hydraulic damper pedals, and these are basically the big boys. Majority of these only work for the PC, but they are some of the most advanced sim racing pedals that you can purchase out there. Now, when it comes to these high-end hydraulic damper pedals, you have a couple of options. You can get them from such companies as Trak, Trak Racer USA, or some of the more popular ones like SimLab, Mecha, as well as SimGrade. And lastly, if you want to get some of more pro model, you can get some from Husingfield, as well as Venom pedals. And with these being so rugged and rigid, you're probably going to need to use some shoes with these to utilize the throttle and the brake pedals, as it's going to require so much force that your bottom feet, if you're using socks, might hurt after a long play period. Now remember, you can always upgrade your pedals, so if you want to just get into the budget and just try out the potentiometers, you can always do that. Or if you just want to go for a low toe pedal, you can also get into those as well. I highly recommend the FANATEC ones, as those are the ones that I use, as well as the V3s. But again, if you get more and more into the sim racing world and you want to get a much more realistic feel on the pedals, you can always work your way up to upgrade into a high-end pedal here, but you're going to be spending a pretty penny for these pedals. So now, once you decided what type of wheelbase, what type of wheel and pedals you're going to be using, this is when it gets to the fun part. This is where you actually go to your rig and see what type of sim rig you are going to be using for all of your components. Now, the reason why I put this close to last is because once you get all your equipment, you have to basically get the rig that's all these equipments are going to fit to. Some of these equipment might not fit into certain sim rigs. That's why you really need to know what you're going to be getting. Once you get your wheel, your pedal, and your wheelbase, that is what is going to determine what type of sim rig you're going to get. Now, when it comes to sim rig, you have a couple of options. You have a foldable option for more of the budget friendly wheel and pedals you're going to be using, and not only that, it makes for easy storage, as you are able to just put it away and it is kind of out of sight. But if you want to get into a much higher end wheel and wheelbase, as well as the brake pedals, you might want to go with something that is a little bit more in the budget. So some companies I highly recommend when it comes to getting the sim rig is GT Omega, Trak Racer, or even the Playseat. Now, one thing I do want to recommend when getting a sim rig is to not get one that has a hole in the middle, as it makes it very uncomfortable for braking and throttling. I don't think many companies are making these types of sim rigs as they were back then, but if you do find one of these, I highly recommend looking for sim rigs that have the structures away from the center part of the pedals, because again, this is going to make things a lot comfortable in the long run, and you're not going to have to fight with that middle pole with your left and right leg. Now, with some of the more budget friendly that I like to go with are the GT Omega or the Playseat. But if you want to spend a little bit more money, you want to get something really rigid but not break the bank too much, the Trak Racer TR8 Pro Racing Simulator is also another great example. But if you just want to get the top of the line, somewhere in the 1000s, then I highly recommend getting the TR160 MK4 Racing from Trak Racer. Because with these higher end rigs, you're going to be able to put in a much more heavier DD wheel. Not only that, but heavier pedals, and it's not going to flex. That is one thing you really want to prevent when you get one of these sim rigs, is reducing the flex in the chassis, because once you start getting a little bit flex, it makes things a little inaccurate when you are using the pedals, as it's not going to be the exact same every single time when you get onto the throttle or onto the brakes. So that's why if you're getting more and more serious into sim racing, you want to be very competitive, I recommend getting one of these higher end sim rigs, just due to the flexing, and as well as it's going to be able to withstand some of these wheelbases that uses a lot of torque, as well as some of these pedals that you have to put in a lot of pressure. Okay, jumping to the very last thing that you are going to need is going to be a monitor. Now, when I first started sim racing, I used to play on a huge 50-inch TV, but I found out the hard way that that is not the best way to enjoy sim racing. The reason why I don't recommend using a TV is because, one, you get a very bad responsive rate when you are sim racing, and if you're trying to be really competitive, it's going to be very important to get a screen that has very low input time, just so you can be a lot more accurate when going into the corners, as well as reaction if there is a wreck ahead of you. When it comes down to monitors, I highly recommend getting a 27-inch or above with a 120 Hz refresh rate, as that I believe is the minimum to give you the smoothest experience when it comes to sim racing. Currently, I've raced with a 32-inch curved 165 hertz refresh rate monitor, and I think this is the absolute best. If you want to get a little bit more crazy and you want to put in a little bit more money into your sim endeavors, you can also get a triple monitor, and with those I highly recommend getting 1080p 144 hertz refresh rate, as that is going to be the best way to get a triple monitor but not eat up your computer GPU if you're using all three monitors. And if you want to get more in depth with sim racing, you can also just get a VR headset, and that will give you the most realistic experience that you can get with sim racing, other than getting additional stuff for your seats like butt kickers, motion, or even high-end speakers around your sim rig. So I hope this guide was really helpful for you guys if you are dabbing into the world of sim racing, as I know it is a lot to think about when you are getting into this hobby, but it really is not the scariest once you start figuring out that the main components you're going to need are basically going to be what platform you want to play on, the wheelbase that matches with that platform, and then from there you can easily just find out what wheel you want to use, what kind of pedals you want to use. And once you have all the equipment down together, it is going to narrow it down to this particular sim rig chassis that will fit all the equipment, and from there it should get just easier and easier. And don't be afraid to ask anybody for help. You can always look at other guides. You can go on Reddit as well as Googling some of the questions that you have for starting in sim racing. Lucky for you guys, there are a plethora of information, and you'd have to be digging hours and hours on the internet to find information on just getting started on sim racing, as that was the case a few years back. But again, I hope this guide really helped you guys out. If you guys still have any questions, put it in the comments down below and I will do my best to try to get to them. Anyways, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed this video, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button down below, as it helps us on the YouTube algorithm. My name is Andrew. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and until next time guys, peace.